I'm really pleased to welcome Rob Lindsay from Balfour Beatty, who is actually a next or soon-to-be graduate of Cranfield University as well, having taken part in our programme here, postgraduate qualification. So he has good insights also into driver behaviour and has implemented some of the techniques that we've developed here. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks. Okay, so Lisa's asked me to speak today specifically on driving simulation and how we've integrated the driver risk index into that activity that we do. I'll breeze over a couple of other areas as well, and we can see how much time we've got left at the end, and obviously the Q&A session as well. I've tried to keep it quite visual so that there's not too much text on the screen for you, but that does have one drawback in that I don't really have any prompts either. So if I do miss anything, if you think I've not covered anything, obviously use the Q&A session hopefully to cover that off. This did work. Okay, so just a bit of context then. Balfour Beatty PLC is a company that was set up in the UK, around 30,000 employees all told in the UK at present. A federated model, so we have lots of different divisions and operating companies, as we call them, working autonomously and then reporting profits, in most cases, back up to group. And Balfour Beatty Fleet Services, where I reside, is one division of Balfour Beatty. So initially we were set up as an internal service provider, so to provide vehicles, to procure vehicles and then supply them on a lease basis back out to the group to do all their activities. And then also we do fleet management, and we have some specialist plant and equipment as well. Obviously a lot of our work is on the track and also out on the roads and on construction sites, so we have a lot of individual bits of plant and equipment as well that we need to be supplying. The other element, which I'm quite pleased to say that has a seat at the table in the fleet business, is the training and risk management division, which is the area where I work. So why I'm pleased to say that is because what we identified as a fleet business, that historically I guess the asset has always been the vehicle. So how can we make the vehicle a bit safer? How can we improve it, its efficiency? So that's always been the main focus. But what we've decided to do, and I'm quite pleased to say, is that we've not identified that drivers are the other big asset there, and the key one for me. So we've made sure that that's addressed through this training and risk management process, which I'll go on to explain in a bit more detail now. So just underpinning all that, as I say, there's a federated model in Balfour Beatty, so there's not really much mandated from group. You're left to sort of get on with your own devices. But a couple of things that have been mandated are initiatives such as this. So Zero Harm, you might have seen it around, you might be familiar with it, similar sort of setups in other companies. But back in 2008, it was declared by our chief executive that as a company we can no longer accept any of these outcomes here. And he actually put a specific timeline on it as well. So we said by 2012, we're quite heavily involved in the Olympics, unfortunately not delivering any medals, but we're delivering the facilities that the Games took place in. So one of the key strategies was to make sure that by that point we need to be a zero harm business. And what they've done is they've actually extended that now. It was quite bold and quite brave to put it on a certain date on it. Not to say that we failed. Certainly we achieved an awful lot, but we still think there's a long way to go as well. And we're not saying that we're never going to do any of these activities. Our village, just to explain that figure, as a couple of the guys mentioned earlier, we don't just look at our own fully employed people. We look at subcontractors, suppliers, people we come into contact with on a daily basis. So we estimate that's our total worldwide. So that fits in quite neatly with the driver risk management program. So this is just an example of the sort of thing that we do in the driver risk management team. So it's a dedicated team within the fleet services business. So we have trainers and support staff working in that team. And this is just an example of one of the programs that we will carry out. So important to mention, that was mentioned briefly earlier in the Unilever presentation, we try and incorporate any employee with a driving licence. So it's not an opt-in program. It's opt-in. You have to opt out if you don't have a licence, basically, and everyone else is covered. So we would typically do an electronic licence check, and then we'd work our way down this procedure here. So we have our own e-learning modules as well. So we An example of what we've used that for is company car and commercial vehicle handbooks. So rather than just give someone a handbook when they get access to a vehicle, we ensure that they've gone through an e-learning module just to make sure they understand their responsibilities and roles as a driver of our company. Either way, they would then fall through and do the driver risk index, which obviously I won't go into too much detail on, but we then identify areas of then development and intervention beyond that. So that's this is only a typical example, and it's not necessarily the only approach. We understand that things like budgets and time constraints and volumes all come into play. This is one of the example approaches that we've taken, and what I'm going to talk about in a second is the driver development course down here for the high risk targeted people. And so one of the elements that we did incorporate into a driver development course was the use of simulators. So the full day course that we integrated the simulator into is a fully interactive day with lots of workshop and classroom elements. But the reason why we wanted to test out the simulator idea as opposed to just going on road or just keeping it purely classroom based was for a number of reasons really. One, it ties in quite neatly with the zero harm message. We're not actually taking anyone out on the road, so it's zero risk. The sustainability messages that we've got as a company as well, and it's obviously becoming of more and more significance certainly in this country around the sustainability agenda. So we're not using any fuel to actually train people and give them some exposure to risk situations. So other elements as well, so it's replicable. You've got the ability to measure people's performance as well quite easily through simulation. So that was one of the main reasons why we wanted to give it a go. And as you can see, it's a fully integrated car, and these are some of the examples of the features. We wanted to make it as realistic as possible. So you can see some of the features of it. Obviously, I don't just want to suggest that there's all positives. There are some drawbacks to using simulation. So things like that we have to be aware of are things like simulator sickness. You've got an issue potentially with the vehicle as well, and that when you go out with a sort of on road in a vehicle, obviously that vehicle can change. But with the simulator, although we can change the graphics and we can change the way that the perception of the driver, that vehicle will pretty much stay the same aesthetically inside. So the interior will pretty much stay the same. But as you can see, we tried to do as much as we can to make it as lifelike as possible. So how did we use it on the actual courses then? So what we did was we ensured that drivers had two separate drives on the course. So they had, you can actually, as I say, measure performance and improvement. We also, before they went on a drive, we actually used the driver risk index, and we had a one-to-one discussion with each of the drivers where we come up with coaching goals, plans for them to work on, not just in the day itself, but also beyond. So we did quite a lot of work around the simulators and the DRI. As I say, the driver risk index was really a thread that ran throughout it. It wasn't just an opportunity to identify risk, it was really to use that as a training aid as well, and then build on the coaching goals for the individuals thereafter. So one of the key elements as well that we did to make sure that it integrated with the driver risk index was engage with people like Lisa and the people at Nottingham University as well, to actually develop scenarios that were bespoke and actually connected to the driver risk index. So particularly we had a scenario that was focused around aggression and also hazard monitoring and also thrill seeking in old money, now otherwise known as driving excitement. So there's three critical factors within the driver risk index, as many as you will be aware. So what we tried to do was develop scenarios that were suitable for those types of individuals that came out high in those areas. So as I say, try to make it as bespoke as possible, and then what we can do after that is then discuss where they might have made certain mistakes, or have a discussion about what they could do to improve their performance. And as I say, we did 2 runs as well, so we got the opportunity to improve on that. So just some results then. So this is just using the simulator-based approach, that diagram that I showed earlier, using the driver risk index, then using a simulator to target high-risk drivers. This is one of the outcomes of that. So this is a reduction in collisions that we experienced here through the rail projects business. So this was a year-on-year sort of a before and after experiment. So we are it was mentioned earlier as well, we are largely self-insured as well, so we have obviously for these sort of stats, there's a lot of value behind them as well from a monetary perspective. So that was a saving on our bottom line as well, as not just from a health and safety point of view. So as I said before, it forms part of a wider driver risk management program for us. So the simulator isn't the only aspect that we worked on. In the meantime, we're looking at other areas as well. So this is just a typical example of sort of a holistic view of how we view driver risk in our business. I mean, each one of these areas we could probably talk about for a day on each section. There's so much to go through. But we'd say that if you're looking at all these areas, or you've got these sort of in place in your company, you're not doing too badly or going too far wrong in terms of trying to manage that driver risk that's out there. And as you can see, we've got the driver risk index is a big part of that for us, and how we manage that risk. Very much a proactive approach we see it as. And what we've done here with vehicle telemetry, as I say, I won't go into it in too much detail, but what we've said is that it's not replacing the driver risk index, so we're not just using the data that's coming out of that as a replacement. But what we can do is it can also be an indicator of where someone might need some development or some intervention of some description. So looking at real behavioural type elements using the telematics, so things like harsh braking, harsh accelerating, cornering, as well as things like speed as well that your average sort of tracking system can get. So we're looking quite a lot in detail about that as a predictor of where our risk might be, but also going forward, and as like the other guys said, we're certainly not there yet. One of the other areas that we're looking to use the driver risk, the vehicle telematics for, is actually measuring performance as well. So after a training course, has their behaviour improved? So we're very big into evaluating the courses, but that would be another element of how we do that that'll improve things from our perspective. So some of the other headline results then that we found, that one's quite small, but as I say, one of the big things that we try and do is evaluate everything that we do quite rigorously. We think that's important. So we use things like voting keypads, so a bit like on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, we have a selection of voting keypads, so we can actually get some anonymous but quantitative data as well from individuals who have attended the courses. So one particular area of Balfour Beatty is Parsons Brinckerhoff. They're a company of ours, and 91% of their delegates said that the driving behaviour would positively change. So we asked quite detailed questions on the evaluation. It's not just a tick box exercise to find out whether they had a nice lunch or whether they thought the trainers welcomed them at the start of the day. There's a whole load of stuff in there that we ask quite pertinent questions around whether we think they're going to change. But then, as I say, we don't want to just take their word for it, so we also look at how we've made a difference in terms of cost, in terms of collision reductions. So Mansell, another Balfour Beatty owned company, found that through a training programme started by the driver risk index and the thread throughout it, they estimated that with a fleet of about 1,200 drivers, they saved between 400 and 2.6 million. So basically what they've done there is they've looked at their actual costs of having the collisions, as I say, being self-insured, every time they knock a wing mirror off or a replacement bumper, that comes off the bottom line. But then they've also taken into account things like replacement vehicle hire, time off work, placating customers where things have gone wrong. So there's a whole load of things in there, and that's why the figures are so sparse. It's quite difficult to put a finger on the actual amount, but you can see that the figures are pretty extreme. So other reductions that we've seen in the plant and fleet business, we saw a reduction of 50% in collisions over 3 years. That wasn't just through the driver risk index and the simulator. There was other programs going on at the same time, so things like mobile phone campaigns, all that sort of good stuff that we were doing at the same time resulted in halving the collisions. And we continue to work that and try and drive that down. Obviously the fleet side remained pretty constant during that time. Again, another area that a different company, Signalling Solutions, completely owned by Balfour Beatty, they looked at reduction in damage and misuse. So this isn't just collisions that they're having and we're reporting through our self-insured process. This was things like tyres and glass. So obviously they saw a big reduction following a programme in actual people getting replacement wing mirrors, replacement windscreens and tyres, that sort of stuff. So again, another area that typically some companies don't think that might have an impact on that. And then again, using the overall feedback from our courses, as I say, quite important to us, evaluating the courses that we do deliver and that we are delivering quality and something that the individual can take something away from. Using the feedback system, again, the anonymous data, so they don't have to, there's no sort of trainer bias in there. This is all anonymous data that we're receiving. Aggregated out at 8.9 out of 10 based on around 10 questions that we asked them at the end of the course. And that was across the whole of 2012. So, as I say, a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what we do. I've probably brushed over quite a bit that might still be of interest, so perhaps we can use the Q&A session. I was also told to hurry up by Lisa before I started, so apologies for that.
Don't disobey. Thank you, my students.